Can you imagine having so much power and wealth that you could shape the destiny of the greatest civilization of your time? What if I told you that this man, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the billionaire from Rome, met an end so brutal and symbolic that it became a legend? To many, the name Crassus may not immediately ring a bell, but his story is a veritable spectacle of unbridled ambition, cunning political maneuvering, and one of the most humiliating military defeats the mighty Roman Republic ever witnessed. It's the story of someone who, despite amassing a colossal fortune and directly influencing the course of Rome, was unable to quench his thirst for something money couldn't buy: military glory. Born around 115 BC, Crassus came from one of Rome's oldest and most prestigious families, the Licinian race. From an early age, he was introduced to a world of power and political influence. His father, a former consul and censor, provided him with an aristocratic education, preparing him for the intrigues and disputes that defined the ancient Rome. But Crassus grew up in a period of great turmoil, marked by bloody civil wars between rival political factions: the populares, who defended the rights of the plebs, and the optimates, who represented the senatorial aristocracy. Have you ever been through a period of so much uncertainty and upheaval? Crassus's life would be directly impacted by this chaos. In 87 BC, the civil war reached its peak. Gaius Marius and his ally Cinna took Rome by force. Crassus's father, a staunch supporter of the Optimates, was captured and executed. His brother was also murdered, and the family's estates were confiscated. Suddenly, the young and promising Crassus, around 28 years old, found himself forced to flee for his life, finding refuge in Spain, where his family still owned some land. This period of exile, a period of profound crisis, would be a turning point for him. Far from Rome, Crassus was undeterred. He began to weave a network of local allies and rebuild his power base, leveraging what remained of his family's wealth. When General Lucius Cornelius Sulla returned to Italy in 83 BC, determined to regain control of the Republic, Crassus saw the perfect opportunity to restore his social and political standing in Rome. He immediately joined the forces of Sulla, who was bent on crushing Marius's followers. With Sulla's victory and his rise to dictatorship, the process of proscriptions, a list of political enemies whose properties were confiscated and sold. And this is where the story of Crassus's fortune takes a fascinating and, for some, dark turn. Crassus became one of the main beneficiaries of this process. He purchased the properties of outcasts at absurdly low prices, often acquiring entire estates, especially in Rome. This ruthless and effective strategy catapulted his heritage to stratospheric levels, quickly making it one of the richest men in Rome. His alliance with Sulla not only opened the doors to a promising military career, but also positioned him in a position of immense economic power. But Crassus's genius for making money didn't stop there. He developed an even more unique method: his own fire brigade. When a fire broke out in Rome, and they were frequent in the densely populated city, Crassus would send his men to negotiate the purchase of the threatened properties. If the owners agreed to sell quickly, Crassus would put out the fire. If they refused, he simply let the building burn. It's a shocking tactic, but one that illustrates Crassus's sharp mind and brutal pragmatism in his relentless pursuit of wealth. This blend of political cunning, luck in alliances, and an impressive and controversial ability to accumulate wealth made him a unique figure in Roman history. What you're about to discover about the height of his power may surprise you and show how, even as the richest man, his story was far from having a happy ending. Stay with me until the end to uncover all the details of his rise and the tragic outcome that awaited him. Crassus's fortune, forged with such diligence and sometimes dubious methods, was not his only obsession. He craved something money could not buy: the military prestige that his rivals, such as Pompey the Great, already boasted. Pompey was acclaimed for his victories against pirates and his campaigns in Spain, while Crassus, despite being wealthy and influential, was seen more as a financier, a behind-the-scenes strategist. This veiled but palpable rivalry between the two giants of Rome would shape the future of the Republic. But Crassus, a man of pragmatic vision, knew that to stay on top, he would need alliances. And it was into this scenario that a young and charismatic politician emerged, fresh from his campaigns in Spain: Julius Caesar. Caesar, with his power of persuasion and popular support, had something that Crassus and Pompey needed. In return, he needed Crassus's vast financial power and Pompey's military influence. So, around 60 BC, these three remarkable men, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar, formed an informal agreement that history would come to know as the First Triumvirate. It wasn't an alliance officially approved by the Senate, but a perfect political mechanism that allowed them to manipulate decisions in Rome. Crassus, with his vast fortune, financed many of Caesar's political endeavors. Pompey, in turn, offered his invaluable military support, and Caesar, with his charisma, ensured that both their interests were defended in the Senate. For Crassus, the triumvirate was a golden opportunity to protect and expand his influence, ensuring that his economic agenda was executed despite opposition from the traditionalists in the Senate. One of his greatest achievements during this period was the renegotiation of the tax contracts of the eastern provinces, something that directly benefited his vast tax collection companies, further increasing his wealth. Despite being an unbeatable political force, the triumvirate was not immune to tensions. Crassus and Pompey, though united by convenience, never completely overcame their rivalry. Pompey's military popularity contrasted with Crassus's image as the alliance's financier. Furthermore, Julius Caesar's growing power and ambitions began to threaten their position. In 56 BC, in Lucca, the three met to renew the pact, and Crassus and Pompey secured new terms as consuls. Caesar, in turn, had his command of his legions in Gaul extended further, consolidating his military power. It was a delicate balance, built on common interests and latent rivalries. Even with all his power and wealth, Crassus harbored a deep resentment. The lack of great military glory to rival Caesar and Pompey, it was a gap in his legacy, a stain on his vanity. It was this relentless pursuit of a grand victory that led him to undertake the most ambitious and disastrous campaign of his life, the war against Parthian Empire. The Parthians, a wealthy and influential Eastern power, were seen as an attractive target, not only for the prestige a victory would bring, but also for the riches to be plundered. Crassus believed that a victory over them would establish him as one of Rome's greatest military leaders, finally balancing the scales with his triumvirate partners. But as history repeatedly shows us, boundless ambition can blind even the most cunning. From the beginning, this campaign was viewed with suspicion in Rome. Cicero himself, one of the greatest orators of his time, openly criticized Crassus, warning that his pursuit of glory and wealth blinded him to the dangers of a war against such a capable enemy with military tactics unknown to the Romans. If this kind of reflection on power and its consequences resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most about Crassus's trajectory so far. Your participation is essential for this story to reach more people. And if you're enjoying uncovering these crucial chapters of history, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your contribution is what makes this channel grow and continue to bring content like this, exploring the dramas and grandeur of antiquity. In 55 BC, Crassus was appointed governor of Syria, a strategic base for his planned campaign. From there, he assembled a formidable army, 7 legions totaling some 50,000 soldiers, including a powerful Gallic cavalry and auxiliaries. Crassus, confident in his numerical superiority and the legendary discipline of the Roman legions, set out toward Parthian territory, certain that his forces would prevail. But he dangerously underestimated the enemy. Crassus, however, underestimated drastically the enemy. As he marched east, the Parthian king Orodes II was not idle. He mobilized his army under the command of General Surena, a military leader of impressive skill who would employ innovative and decisive tactics against the Roman legions. Crassus, upon crossing the Euphrates River, encountered a Parthian army that was numerically inferior, but had 2 crucial advantages: the heavy cavalry, the fearsome cataphracts, protected by armor that made them almost invincible, and the mounted archers, masters of the art of shooting arrows while riding at high speed, retreating and attacking without respite. This combination proved to be devastating against the rigid and, until then, invincible legions of Crassus. Surena, a brilliant strategist, knew Roman battle tactics and knew how to exploit every inch of the desert terrain. He employed a strategy of movement relentless. The Parthian archers, mounted on swift horses, rained an incessant hail of arrows on the Roman legions, always staying out of range of the infantry's counterattack. The cataphracts in turn launched devastating charges against the Roman formations, crushing their cohesion and opening breaches for annihilation. Crassus, faced with this mentality, a completely unfamiliar combat strategy, he was unable to adapt his forces. He was stuck with a shock warfare model, and the Roman army was cornered. The soldiers, exhausted, lacking adequate supplies, and under a constant hail of arrows, began to fall into disarray. Every attempt at a Roman advance was met with slaughter, as the Parthian archers continued to attack from afar, giving no chance for a response. It was a transformation, brutal war, the Romans knew, and Crassus was not prepared for it. The Battle of Carrhae turned into a nightmare. During the battle, Publius Licinius Crassus, son of Marcus Licinius and commander of the Roman cavalry, attempted a desperate charge to break through the enemy lines. However, he and his unit were surrounded and annihilated by the Parthians. Publius's death was a devastating blow, devastating for Crassus, both emotionally and militarily. The morale of the Roman army quickly collapsed. The legions, surrounded, exhausted, and without hope, were decimated. Of the 50,000 Roman soldiers Crassus led on the campaign, more than 30,000 were killed or captured. Hidden truth was revealed. The supposed Roman invincibility was not universal. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened next is one of the darkest and most symbolic chapters in history. After this catastrophic defeat at Carrhae, Crassus attempted to negotiate a settlement with Surenna to save what remained of his army. However, the negotiations turned into an ambush. Crassus was betrayed and murdered by the Parthians. According to some historical sources, such as the historian Plutarch, the Parthians mocked Crassus after his death by pouring molten gold into his mouth, a cruel symbol of his insatiable greed for wealth, which, ironically, had led to his own destruction. Impact. The news of Crassus's death at Carrhae resonated profoundly throughout Roman politics. The First Triumvirate, that powerful alliance that had maintained a fragile balance in Rome, began to crumble without Crassus as mediator. The tension between Caesar and Pompey, already simmering, increased exponentially, setting the stage for the next great day of Rome and its own bloody conflicts. The Parthian campaign, which should have brought the glory and wealth Crassus so craved, ended up becoming one of the most bitter and shameful defeats of Roman military history. Crassus not only lost thousands of soldiers, but also caused a great shock in the prestige of the empire, which until then believed in the invincibility of its legions. Comment there. The end of Crassus is a lesson. Crassus's ambition was not limited to simply accumulating ever more coins. The richest man in Rome, the one who dared to face Spartacus's indomitable legion of slaves, carried a deep wound. Despite all his financial and political achievements, he lacked the military glory that made names like Pompey and later Julius Caesar great. This lack gnawed at him, fueling an incessant desire for a great victory on the battlefield that could finally elevate him to the rank of the greatest Roman generals. This quest for recognition would be the driving force behind his most fatal decision. By 72 BC, the slave revolt led by Spartacus, a former gladiator, had become a monumental threat to the Roman Republic. Roman legions were being successively defeated, and the rebel army grew in number and boldness, moving toward northern Italy with plans to cross the Alps and escape the peninsula. The Roman Senate, desperate, sought an immediate solution. It was at this moment of crisis that Crassus was appointed supreme commander of the campaign against the rebels. Already possessing a reputation for cunning and rigorous discipline, Crassus accepted the challenge. Crassus knew that a victory over Spartacus would not only eliminate an internal threat, but also consolidate his political position and grant him the much-desired military prestige. Taking command of approximately 40,000 soldiers, Crassus reorganized his legions and imposed a discipline that bordered on brutality. One of his first and most infamous measures was to revive the practice of decimation. Yes, you heard right. 1 in 10 soldiers in a unit who deserted or displayed cowardice was summarily executed. This measure, though unpopular and shocking, was the hidden truth behind its effectiveness. It ruthlessly restored discipline among the troops who had been shaken by previous defeats. Crassus's mindset was clear. Either his men would fight ferociously, or they would pay the ultimate price. After imposing this harsh disciplinary transformation, Crassus adopted a meticulous and cautious approach. He recognized Spartacus's tactical genius and knew that a direct confrontation without proper planning could result in another humiliating defeat for Rome. Rather than attack head-on, Crassus decided to corner the rebel army, cutting off its supply lines. As Spartacus and his followers retreated to southern Italy, Crassus built a line of fortifications, a sort of wall, along the Isthmus of Calabria. This strategic barrier blocked the slaves' path north, trapping them in the region. Spartacus attempted to break through Crassus's defenses on several occasions, but all his attempts failed. Hunger and scarcity of resources began to weaken the rebel forces, which eventually fragmented. While some attempted to flee, Spartacus rallied the remaining forces for a final, desperate confrontation with Crassus. In 71 BC, the decisive battle took place near the Saro River in southern Italy. Although Spartacus fought bravely, leading his men from the front lines, the rebel army was completely and brutally destroyed by the Roman legions. Spartacus was killed in combat, although his body was never found, fueling legends about his fate. The victory over Spartacus was crushing, but Crassus's decision to send a definitive message was even more impactful. He ordered the crucifixion of some 6,000 surviving slaves along the Appian Way, the main road connecting Rome to southern Italy. It was a terrifying image, a brutal warning, and a macabre spectacle for anyone who dared challenge Rome's authority or Crassus's. This was the great military victory he had longed for, a moment that would cement his status as one of Rome's most influential men. But as we see from the glimpses of his wealth and the revelations of his ambition, Crassus was still not satisfied. Comment there. Crassus was a cruel genius. Even after his crushing victory over Spartacus, which established him as one of the richest and most influential men in Rome, Crassus faced a new and constant challenge: political competition with the other giants of the Republic. One of his greatest rivals was Pompey the Great, who shared the consulship with him in 70 BC. The two, despite being colleagues in the highest Roman office, had very different visions and personalities. Crassus, with his reputation as a shrewd negotiator and master of finance, was less popular among the Roman soldiers and people than Pompey. Pompey enjoyed immense military prestige due to his spectacular victories in campaigns against pirates and in Spain. This difference in popularity created a hidden but intense competition between them, even when they were forced to share political power. It was a dynamic of constant readjustment and a quest for supremacy. Despite this rivalry, Crassus, with his strategic mindset, realized he would need clever alliances to remain relevant in Roman politics. And it was into this complex scenario that Julius Caesar emerged, a young politician on the rise, emerging as a growing force in Rome. Caesar was returning from his own campaigns in Spain and possessed both the charisma and popular support that Crassus and Pompey, each in their own way, needed for their own interests. But of course, Caesar also knew he would need Crassus's inexhaustible financial support and Pompey's unquestionable military influence to achieve his ambitious political goals. It was a veritable web of intersecting interests, a journey of mutual convenience. Thus, in 60 BC, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar entered into an informal agreement, which would later become known as the First Triumvirate. This political pact was not formalized by the Senate, but operated as an alliance of convenience between the three leaders, allowing them to manipulate political decisions in Rome in their favor. Crassus, with his financial power, funded many of Caesar's political activities, who, in return, used his powers of persuasion and charisma to ensure that Crassus and Pompey's interests were met in the Senate. Pompey, in turn, offered his military support, validating the group's decisions and projects. For Crassus, the First Triumvirate represented a unique opportunity to protect and expand his influence. The alliance provided him with the necessary support to ensure the execution of his economic and political agenda, even in the face of persistent opposition from the Senate. One of Crassus's most significant achievements during this period was the renegotiation of tax contracts for the eastern provinces. This directly benefited his vast fortune. Crassus had significant investments in tax collection companies, and securing more favorable terms for these companies was a colossal personal and economic victory. Furthermore, the support of Caesar and Pompey offered Crassus a measure of balance against the optimates in the Senate, who still distrusted his ambitions and the origins of his wealth. It was a transformation in the Roman power game, with these three giants controlling the scenes. Although he lacked Pompey's military prestige or Caesar's magnetic charisma, Crassus used his wealth and political influence ruthlessly to ensure his opinions were heard and, more importantly, respected. A clear example of this occurred in 59 BC, when Caesar was elected consul. During his term, he approved a series of agrarian and economic reforms that directly benefited both Crassus and Pompey. These legislative acts further cemented the Triumvirate's control over the Roman political apparatus. The revelations of this collaboration show how, behind the republican facade, power was concentrated in the hands of a few. However, despite being a powerful alliance, the Triumvirate began to show signs of strain. Crassus and Pompey, though temporarily united, never completely overcame the rivalry that had plagued them for years. Pompey remained widely popular among the people, while Crassus was often seen merely as the financier of the alliance, lacking the same military glory as his partners. The hidden truth was that Julius Caesar's growing power, coupled with his undeniable ambition, began to threaten the other two's position within the alliance. It was a recipe for disaster, a journey that would culminate in tragedy. Comment there. Triumvirate has total power. In 56 BC, realizing that the tension between them threatened the very existence of the Triumvirate, the three leaders met in the city of Lucca. This meeting was crucial for renegotiating their alliance, a true backstage of Roman politics. At this meeting, Crassus and Pompey secured a new term as consuls for 55 BC. Caesar, in turn, had his command of his campaigns in Gaul extended, allowing him to further consolidate his military power and influence over the legions. It was a pact to maintain stability, but this hidden truth hid the seeds of future conflict. Yet even after amassing an incalculable fortune and establishing a powerful political alliance, Crassus always deeply resented his lack of military glory, comparable to that of Caesar and Pompey. He yearned for a great victory on the battlefield, something that could rival the epic achievements of his allies, and finally satisfy his thirst for recognition. It was this boundless ambition, this quest to transform his legacy, that led him to undertake a campaign as ambitious as it was disastrous: the war against the Parthian Empire. That time, the Parthian Empire was a wealthy and influential Eastern power, and was seen by many in Rome as an extremely attractive target. Not only would the prestige that a victory would bring be immense, but the riches that could be plundered were also an irresistible attraction for Crassus. He firmly believed that a victory over the Parthians would cement his position as one of Rome's greatest military leaders, and finally balance the rivalry with Pompey and Caesar. It was a decision driven by vanity and a desire to outdo others. From the outset, however, this campaign was met with deep suspicion by many in Rome. Crassus had a long history of greed for wealth, and many of his contemporaries considered the campaign motivated more by his notorious avarice than by any genuine interest in Rome's strategic objectives. Cicero himself, one of the Republic's greatest orators and senators, openly criticized Crassus, stating that his blind pursuit of glory and wealth blinded him to the dangers of a war against the Parthians. They were a highly capable enemy, with military tactics completely unknown to the Romans, something Crassus stubbornly ignored. This was the revelation of a bleak future. This obstinacy, unfortunately, was not enough to stop Crassus. In 55 BC, he was appointed governor of the province of Syria, which would serve as the strategic base for his campaign against Parthia. From there, he assembled a formidable army, 7 legions, totaling some 50,000 soldiers, including a large contingent of Gallic cavalry and auxiliary troops. Crassus, confident in his numerical superiority and the legendary discipline of the Roman legions, set out toward Parthian territory with unshakable confidence, believing that his forces would easily prevail over the eastern armies. Little did he know that this would be the final journey of his life, and that the impact of his decisions would be devastating for him and for Rome itself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened next is one of the darkest and most symbolic chapters in Roman military history. Comment there. Greed has a price. Crassus, however, drastically underestimated the enemy. As he marched east, the Parthian king Orodes II was not idle. He mobilized his army under the command of General Surena, a military leader of impressive skill, who would employ innovative and decisive tactics against the Roman legions. Upon crossing the Euphrates River, Crassus encountered a Parthian army that was numerically inferior but possessed two crucial advantages: heavy cavalry, the fearsome cataphracts, protected by armor that made them nearly invincible, and mounted archers, masters of the art of shooting arrows while riding at high speed, retreating and attacking relentlessly. This combination proved devastating against Crassus's rigid and, until then, invincible legions. Surena, a brilliant strategist, knew Roman battle tactics and knew how to exploit every inch of the desert terrain. He employed a war strategy of relentless movement. Parthian archers, mounted on swift horses, rained a relentless hail of arrows on the Roman legions, always staying out of range of the infantry's counterattack. The cataphracts, in turn, launched devastating charges against the Roman formations, crushing their cohesion and opening gaps for annihilation. Crassus, confronted with this completely unfamiliar combat mentality, was unable to adapt his forces. He was trapped in a shock warfare model, and the Roman army was cornered. The soldiers, exhausted, lacking adequate supplies, and under a constant hail of arrows, began to fall into disarray. Every attempted Roman advance was met with slaughter, as the Parthian archers continued to attack from afar, giving them no chance to respond. It was a brutal transformation of warfare as the Romans knew it, and Crassus was unprepared for it. The Battle of Carrhae became a nightmare. During the battle, Publius Licinius Crassus, son of Marcus Licinius and commander of the Roman cavalry, attempted a desperate charge to break through the enemy lines. However, he and his unit were surrounded and annihilated by the Parthians. Publius's death was a devastating blow to Crassus, both emotionally and militarily. The morale of the Roman army quickly collapsed. The legions, surrounded, exhausted, and without hope, were decimated. Of the 50,000 Roman soldiers Crassus led into the campaign, more than 30,000 were killed or captured. A hidden truth was revealed. The supposed Roman invincibility was not universal. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened next is one of the darkest and most symbolic chapters in history. After this catastrophic defeat at Carrhae, Crassus attempted to negotiate a settlement with Surena to save what remained of his army. However, the negotiations turned into an ambush. Crassus was betrayed and murdered by the Parthians. According to some historical sources, such as the historian Plutarch, the Parthians mocked Crassus after his death by pouring molten gold into his mouth. This was a cruel symbol of their insatiable greed for wealth, which, ironically, had led to his own destruction. The impact of Crassus's death at Carrhae resonated profoundly throughout Roman politics. The First Triumvirate, that powerful alliance that had maintained a fragile balance in Rome, began to crumble without Crassus as a mediator. The tension between Caesar and Pompey, already simmering, increased exponentially, paving the way for Rome's next great journey and its own bloody conflicts. The Parthian campaign, which should have brought the glory and wealth Crassus so desperately craved, ended up becoming one of the most bitter and shameful defeats in Roman military history. Crassus not only lost thousands of soldiers, but also dealt a major blow to the prestige of the empire, which until then had believed in the invincibility of its legions. Comment there. The end of Crassus is a lesson. Despite the crushing defeat at Carrhae, Crassus's story does not end with his brutal death. The impact of his end resonated throughout the Roman Republic, drastically altering the course of history. The First Triumvirate, this powerful alliance of three giants that had until then maintained a fragile balance of power in Rome, began to crumble. Without Crassus to mediate the simmering rivalry between Julius Caesar and Pompey, the tension between the two increased exponentially. The journey of collaboration gave way to a bitter dispute. While Caesar consolidated his power in Gaul, with victories that made him increasingly popular and feared, Pompey was named sole consul in Rome, increasing his control over the Republic's institutions. This escalation of power and ambition, without a third mediator, would push Rome to the brink of a new civil war. Crassus's death was not only a personal tragedy, it was a humiliating blow to all of Rome. He not only lost tens of thousands of soldiers, but also dealt a massive blow to the empire's prestige. Until then, ancient Rome had believed in the invincibility of its legions, a myth that the defeat at Carrhae brutally shattered. The Parthian campaign, which should have brought the glory and wealth Crassus so desperately craved, ended up becoming one of the most bitter and shameful defeats in Roman military history. It was a painful revelation of the vulnerability of an empire that saw itself as unshakable. The figure of Crassus offers a fascinating mentality for analysis. He was a man of contradictions, a brilliant businessman, and a flawed military leader. His ability to accumulate wealth was unparalleled, but his blindness to military realities and his underestimation of an unknown enemy were his greatest weaknesses. His relentless pursuit of more, be it money or glory, is a stark reminder that ambition, when unchecked, can lead to ruin. The transformation he sought on the battlefield ultimately proved his own undoing. Crassus's legacy is a testament to the complexity of power in ancient Rome. He proved that wealth could buy political influence, legions, and even shape society, but it did not guarantee immunity from strategic mistakes or the cruelty of fate. The behind-the-scenes story of his life reveals a pragmatic, calculating, and at times ruthless man who did not hesitate to use the most brutal means to achieve his ends. His decisions impacted not only his own life, but forever, altered the course of the Roman Republic, contributing to the scenario that would culminate in its transition to empire. The hidden truth behind Crassus's failure at Carrhae was his inability to adapt. Parthian tactics of light cavalry and mounted archers were a nightmare for the heavy, slow-moving Roman legions. Crassus failed to develop an effective countermeasure, and his stubbornness in following a traditional battle plan in a completely different environment and against a completely different enemy sealed his fate. It is a timeless lesson in the importance of flexibility and knowledge of one's adversary. Crassus, the man who dominated Rome's economy, failed to dominate the most crucial battlefield of his life. This story makes us reflect on the limits of ambition and the price of the unbridled pursuit of power and glory. Crassus reached the pinnacle of wealth and influence, but his dissatisfaction led him to an end that would tarnish his name for all eternity. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring how Crassus's fall paved the way for the rise and inevitable conflict between the two remaining giants of the Triumvirate. Right there, history repeats itself. Crassus's downfall at Carrhae was not just the tragic end of one man, it was the catalyst for one of the greatest political transformations in ancient Rome. Consider this, the alliance that, for years, maintained a fragile balance of power between Rome's three most influential men. Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar simply imploded. Without Crassus to act as the link, the pragmatic mediator between Caesar's growing ambitions and Pompey's enviable popularity, the rivalry between the two exploded uncontrollably. It was the hidden truth of that triumvirate. Crassus, the wealthiest, was also the glue that held the other two together. With him out of the picture, there was no longer any containment. The immediate impact was devastating. While Julius Caesar consolidated his military power and fame in Gaul, becoming a near-legendary figure to the Romans, Pompey saw his influence in Rome grow exponentially. He was appointed sole consul, a position of immense power that placed him in direct control of the Republic's institutions. This rise for Pompey was a response to Caesar's growing shadow and an attempt to reassert his supremacy. The mindset of both leaders became increasingly focused on domination. The journey of collaboration was over, and the journey of confrontation was just beginning. Crassus's death was not only a personal tragedy for his family and a military disaster for Rome, but also a profound shock to the Roman psyche. The empire, which had seen itself as invincible, was forced to confront a brutal reality. Its legions could indeed be defeated, and by an enemy many considered barbarian. This revelation of vulnerability was a shock. The Parthian campaign, which should have been the stage for Crassus's glory and Rome's expansion, became a symbol of arrogance and defeat, an indelible stain on Roman military history. The behind-the-scenes story of this tragedy reveals how unbridled ambition, even for the most powerful, can exact a heavy price. The tragedy of Crassus is a stark reminder that while wealth can open many doors and grant immense power, it is no guarantee of success or even survival when decisions are made based on vanity and underestimation of the adversary. Carrhae's lesson has resonated for generations. Knowing the enemy and adapting to the new realities of combat is as crucial as the number of soldiers or the amount of gold in one's coffers. Crassus, the financial genius, failed miserably as a general, and this failure cost him his life and destabilized the world he helped build. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, exploring what happened after Crassus left the scene and how the rivalry between Caesar and Pompey plunged Rome into civil war. Right there, power and fall. Crassus's death at Carrhae was not just an isolated event, it was a political earthquake that completely destabilized the Roman landscape. The first Triumvirate, that informal but powerful alliance uniting Rome's three most influential men, Crassus, Pompey the Great, and Julius Caesar, collapsed instantly. Consider this. For years, Crassus had functioned as a link, a pragmatic mediator between Caesar's growing ambitions and Pompey's popularity and military prestige. Without Crassus, there was no one left to contain the simmering rivalry between these two titans, and the already existing tension exploded uncontrollably. This was the hidden truth of that pact. The presence of Crassus, the richest man, was what kept the balance in balance. The impact of this loss was immediate and profound. While Julius Caesar consolidated his military power and fame in Gaul with an iron fist, transforming himself into a near-mythical figure for the Roman people, Pompey saw his influence in Rome grow exponentially. He was appointed sole consul, a position that gave him absolute control over the institutions of the Republic. Pompey's rise was largely a response to Caesar's growing shadow, a desperate attempt to reassert his supremacy and ensure that no one else could rival his power in Rome. The mindsets of both leaders hardened, heading toward direct confrontation. The journey of alliances and compromises had come to an end, replaced by a path of relentless rivalry. The defeat at Carrhae and Crassus's death were a humiliating blow not only to him, but to the entire Roman Republic. The empire, which until then had seen itself as invincible, was forced to confront a brutal reality. Its legions could indeed be defeated, and by an enemy many considered inferior, a barbarian. This revelation of vulnerability was a profound shock to Roman self-esteem. The Parthian campaign, which Crassus dreamed would bring him glory and wealth, became a symbol of arrogance and defeat, an indelible stain on Rome's glorious military history. The behind-the-scenes story of this tragedy shows us how unbridled ambition, even for the most powerful, can exact a heavy price. The figure of Crassus is a stark reminder that while wealth can open many doors and grant immense power, it does not guarantee immunity from strategic mistakes or the cruelty of fate. His ability to amass wealth was unparalleled, but his blindness to military realities and his underestimation of an unknown enemy were his greatest weaknesses. The transformation he sought on the battlefield ultimately proved his own undoing. Crassus's decisions impacted not only his own life, but forever altered the course of the Roman Republic, paving the way for the civil war that would follow. The hidden truth behind Crassus's failure at Carrhae was his inability to adapt. Parthian tactics of light cavalry and mounted archers were a nightmare for the heavy, slow-moving Roman legions. Crassus failed to develop an effective countermeasure, and his stubbornness in following a traditional battle plan in a completely different environment and against a completely different enemy sealed his fate. It is a timeless lesson in the importance of flexibility and a deep understanding of one's adversary. Crassus, the financial genius who dominated Rome's economy, failed miserably as a general, and this failure cost him his life and destabilized the world he helped build. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, exploring the direct consequences of Crassus's death and how this tragedy triggered the inevitable and bloody war between Caesar and Pompey. Right there, the end of an era. Crassus's mindset, shaped by a life of dizzying ascent and relentless ambition, shows us that all the wealth in the world cannot buy destiny, nor guarantee absolute success. His journey is a vivid reminder that the unbridled pursuit of glory, if not accompanied by wisdom and adaptability, can lead to the most tragic of ends. The revelations that history offers us about figures like Crassus help us understand the complexities of power, the consequences of decisions, and the continuous transformation of societies. It is a hidden truth that history repeats itself, and by looking behind the scenes of Rome, we can find valuable lessons for the present. And if you've made it this far, if you've immersed yourself with me in this fascinating and dramatic story of Crassus, the richest man in Rome, it means you value unraveling the layers of history and the lessons it offers. This connection we create throughout the narrative is what drives this channel. If the content we deliver is relevant to you, and if you want to continue this journey of discovery about the great figures and events that shaped the world, a like on this video will go a long way in bringing this story to more people. And to not miss the next chapters of our journey through time, subscribe to the channel. It's your way of saying, I'm with you until the end. 2. Delve deeper into this fascinating universe and see how Crassus's fall truly ushered in a new era for Rome. There's a video here that perfectly complements this topic. Click through and follow along with me.